Hey, it's Carl. I'm going to try and install a trailer hitch on my Kia Niro EV today. So first of all, my car is a Kia 2022 Niro electric, and the trailer hitch that I got is the Torklift Central. You can see the model number there. So it comes as a single unit, ready to bolt up with a bunch of hardware, fishing tools, all that kind of fun stuff. So first of all, I put the car up on some ramps. So you need something solid to work under. Do not work under a jack. Jack stands will work as long as they're properly rated, that sort of thing. But these kind of ramps, in my opinion, are the best. So just do it safely. You don't want the car coming down on you. And one of the first things we got to do is take off this skirt right here. So you can see there's a bunch of little plastic clips. So we're going to have to remove all those to get access to what's underneath. So the instructions say to use a trim tool. I'm using something like this, and the little trim pieces, they look something like this. So when they're on the car, you'll see they're kind of flush. There's a little recess there. You can get in there, carefully pry it. You don't want to break these. There you go, pops open, and then the whole thing pulls out. Let's do another one just to show how it goes. Get in that little tab right there, little recessed area. Carefully wiggle it out. You've got some dirt and stuff falling out. That's it. And repeat it for the other ones. So the next thing is these nuts right here. They are 10 millimeter. So the forward on the car is this way, the rear of the car is this way. So I'm lying underneath now. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then after that we're gonna have to take these guys out, and then I'm hoping the whole thing should just drop down. So one thing to watch on these is there's usually a bunch of dirt up here, so if you're lying underneath the car, just make sure you're not right underneath it and you're wearing some safety goggles. So I'm gonna loosen these things up. It's just a single piece. And maybe the other piece of advice, when you're getting to these, the regular extender is a little on the short side, so you may want a longer one or double up on them. So I doubled up on the extender and used the one that's a wobbly, so you're able to get straight underneath it. And there it is. Alright, so now we got to get these guys out. So these plastic ones are 14 millimeter, so I had to switch to my larger ratchet. They are plastic, so you're going to be careful. You don't want to use something that's going to mar them. And it looks like they're captive, so once you get it loose, the whole thing's kind of dropped down. Looks like it's captive here on the back, so it's probably going to tip forward towards me. Now, sure enough, when I got this one loose, so now the whole thing is tipping forward, and it's hinged on these in the back. I'm going to pull it towards the front of the car, let it loose, and there's going to be a bunch of dirt dropping down, so again, be careful with your eyes. So this is what it looks like underneath. Still pretty clean. So this is what the piece looks like from the top. Be a good opportunity to clean it out. And ultimately, it looks like we got 7 of these clips that came out and 6 of these nuts. So just for fun, I decided just to hold up the bumper here, the hitch. So I'm holding it up here so you can see we're going to be using that little rubber cover. We're going to be taking that off. We're going to be using that bolt, so we got to take that out. And the other thing is we got to notch the bumper cover, and that's the instruction. So we're going to have to make a little cut, mark it in the center where this goes in, and then cut that out. And the same thing on the other side. You can kind of see where that hole is right there, and there's a little rubber cover. We got to pry that out. And up here, this is on the right side of the car, so starboard, if you will. So there's a bolt there, so that's going to have to come out just to get our bearings here. and the whole thing should fit underneath the bumper cover except for the center part itself. So that's going to have to be cut out, and that's why that's next in the instructions. One other point, you see these elongated holes. So those, the way I was holding it up is it went on the outside of this. So right up here, that's where those are going to get mounted. So again, just to get our bearings here, so there's a hole here, there's a hole here, and then there are the two elongated ones on the outside. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means we got to take this rubber plug out, and it just peels right out. Do the same thing on the other side. And then these guys, this one and this one, they're going to have to come out. So in the instructions, it tells us to trim the bumper cover, and so you got to mark the center, and then it's a 3" by 5" rectangle. So we're going to start in the center. You can see the center of the car here. This will be the center. I guess this thing's going to have to disappear. So we're going to mark the center here and put a 3 by 5 rectangle cut out here. So I had a minor complication here. There's a little clip attached to the middle bottom of this bumper cover. It's on this little rail. So then what you got to do, if you see there's that one of those little trim clips sticking out, that's because I already pried it loose. So that's got to come off. And now it's detached because we need to make the cut right in this area. It's got to be loosened. So that trim piece has to come off. So I marked it on here, but it seems like 5 inches wide. It seems like extreme overkill. There is that little gusset piece right there that needs clearance. I think that's the important thing. So I think I'm going to start with a smaller rectangle, since I can always cut a bigger hole. So looking at this gusset piece, it's really only about 1.5. It's hard to see in the sunlight here. About 1.5 inches wide. So for now, I made this rectangle here about 2 inches wide and 1.5 inches deep. I just made a couple passes with the utility knife, and it's cutting through there. So it turns out you have to cut a little bit more than 2 inches deep, meaning front to back, just because there's this whole clip underneath. Otherwise it's not going to come off as it is. I kind of took the end off of it, so I'm guessing it's more like a 2x2. So the next part of the instruction is to notch the bottom panel, the bottom cover that we took off, but I think I'm going to do that last. So the next thing to happen is we got to put in the vertical mounting hardware, and this is where it gets a little tricky. This is using that fishing wire. It has to go into this hole, and we do use that fishing hardware because there's a rectangular piece that has to be pushed in sideways. So actually, before we do that, I forgot I need to remove these bolts right here, because otherwise these aren't going to line up right. So this is a 14 millimeter. It needed a little bit of breaking loose first, but take that out. I believe this is going to get replaced, so I don't think we'll need it anymore, but we'll put it aside for now. There it is. So we're going to need that hole. We're going to do the same thing on the other side here. Okay. So the coiled up fishing piece looks like that, and then it's just a big wire. So we need to put it in this order with the bolt through the serrated washer, through the square, the rectangular washer, and then onto the springy part. So when it's all done, it looks like this, and that's the piece we're going to feed through that hole. So I'm finding that the bolt pushes through, but this star washer does not. It's got too large of an outside diameter. The other piece here will end up fitting through, the problem is I can't get the star washer through, so I'm going to have to think of something. Either I'm going to have to lop off some of the outer stars, or maybe bend them up to get it to go through that hole. So, in order to get it to fit through the hole, I ended up cutting some of the outer stars off of the star washer. This is what the old one looked like. This is what I did to make it fit through the hole. I think because it sits ultimately between this rectangular washer and the bolt, and it's just supposed to hold this in place and supposed to keep the bolt from moving. I don't think it's going to matter, so I'm going to go ahead and cut the other one for the other side. Alright, let's try this again. The star washer has two ends ground down, so now it should fit into that hole. Here's the bolt with the fishing spring attached to it, so it goes up in here. And then the next piece is this washer that we just cut down, which now fits. And then the square piece. And now the idea is you put everything back together. It comes back down like looking like that. So you keep this piece attached because we're going to need to thread that through the hitch itself. But first we're going to do the other side. Again, bolt first. It's got the Fisher springs piece and the split star washer, and then the rectangular, and then the Fisher. We'll line them all and you leave them hanging. Now next we're going to raise the hitch into place, and then we need to secure it with something. So we're going to secure it with these outside threaded holes, and that'll hold it in place. I'm not going to tighten it up, so we have two out there and we have one here. So now we got the hitch underneath the vehicle, and we thread the Fisher wire through the appropriate hole, like so. So that when we raise it up, it lines up with those bolts. And then to hold it in place, we're going to have to put at least one of these outside bolts on to keep it in place. So at this point, the hitch is up. I don't have these nuts attached yet, but I do have these bolts attached on the side, loosely still, because we still need to mate this one up. And it's the same thing on the other side. This one's still not in. This one's still loose. And these ones are in, but only loosely. Because we're going to have to move this around a little bit to get these to line up perfectly. So these bolts took quite a bit of effort to get them in there, just because the alignment was not perfect. They were rubbing. It's pretty tough to get them in there. I'm still torquing down on them, and even though the whole hitch is still loose, so I think it's just there's some tolerance issues. In any event, the outer bolts are not tightened down yet, so everything's loose, but yet these two left and right, they're kind of a bear to get in, so it's taking a lot of force. I hope I don't snap one off. But anyway, the next thing that has to happen is these guys, we got to take the bolt fishers off and make sure that we don't lose the bolt at this point. Flat and nut have to go on there, and if I see correctly, the flat has to be against the body, and then the split is against the nut, so the flat goes first. Right, there it is. You just have to make sure it doesn't pop up in there. Okay, so Fisher wire is off. Alright, so that took two hands, but yeah, the flat first, then the split, and then the nut. So we're still going to keep that a little bit loose and then tighten everything down one at a time. So there's the other side. Flat, split, and then the nut. So now we're going to go around and tighten everything up. Alright, it's done. Just for reference, the smaller bolts are 17mm heads. These are 19s. And the outside ones are 17s. Alright, everything's good and snug. Now it's time to reassemble everything else. So there's the final product, at least without the shield installed. This one's the 2-inch receiver. This part is stainless. That's one of the nice things about the Torklift. So even if it gets nicked, it shouldn't rust. So I am going to have to notch the cover. The issue is these pieces right here. This piece here, where that bolt goes in, it's not going to clear. So I have to make a notch right to the left of that hole. And then the other pieces here in the middle, it's for the actual trailer hitch. There's a piece I'm going to have to cut out there. And obviously the same thing for that piece on the other side. I'm going to have to notch that. So the notch for the trailer hitch itself ended up getting a little bigger than it needed to be. I thought I felt underneath and got it right. It doesn't really matter. Now it fits. And then these slots kind of end up looking like this for those gussets on the hitch itself. And then same thing on the other side. So that's it. When you put it back on, the lips, these they slip in first, and then these little nuts, they actually just push on, and then it holds it in place. So now I don't feel like taking it back down to show, because it's pretty self-explanatory. Like I said, this piece goes along this edge, goes in first, and then you just kind of pivot it up. Those snap into place, and now I'm just going to have to replace each of these screws, and then each of these little clips, and that should be it. That should button it all up. Alright, and all the little pop rivets are back, and you're gonna have one left over. So 1, 2, 3, there used to be one in the middle, 4, 5, 6. So originally I had 7, and there was another one that was popped out somewhere else, that something I had to cut away. So I ended up with 2 extras plus these 2 bolts. So that's the only parts left over. Just a quick review of the hardware. The little molding nuts at the beginning and at the end, those are 10mm. The little push nut that's captive in the lower screen, that's a 14mm. And then as far as the bolts, the smaller ones are 17mm, and then the larger ones are 19. So this socket barely made it. If you have a deep socket, that might actually be a little bit better. I was starting to lose a little bit of grip, but I think I got it in torqued as well as it could be. But those are kind of the tools that you need, and you know, other than the usual, the ratchets, measuring tape, knife, and again, I ended up using a Dremel with a cutting edge, and then I used a grinder for those star washers to cut down the ends of those. So that's about it. It's back in. This is what it looks like. Of course, it's still up on the stand, and with the rear shield, lower shield mounted again. Again, this is stainless. That's kind of nice, so it shouldn't rust. So this is ready to go on some biking trips.